Data Storytellers. It's a new episode of the podcast, and I'm very excited to have Kyle Herrman with me on the show because we had some good conversations. He attended our masterclass and brought a lot of value to the discussion, and he has a topic that he has a lot to say on. So, Kyle, welcome on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
No, absolutely. And Kyle, just before we dive into your professional background, can you just share a few words around like what you're doing right now? Like, what is your role and mandate over at Nestle Purina?
Certainly. I am leading a team of internal analytical consultants. We have set up a hub and spoke model here at Purina, and I lead the AI ML, for lack of a better name. Pick your buzzword, right? The buzzwords will change every 5 years, but that's what we're currently being called, is the AI ML team within the hub organization that is overall of data and analytics. And so we operate within each of the spokes. We help make sure that the spokes understand how to develop a use case, deliver value. We partner with them on anything technical that they need help with. We also run a data science internship program. And so we bring in fresh talent and teach them how to be good consultants, and then we spin them out into the various functions: supply chain, sales, marketing, etc. So that's my role.
Awesome. Well, this will be today's theme, right? The hub and spoke model and operating model. So we're gonna take a deep dive into that playbook. Before we do so, like what got you into the world of analytics? How did you become like an analytics leader at such a prominent brand?
Certainly. I'm actually a psychologist by training. So my degree is in organizational psychology. So I came into the analytical field through the social sciences. I always liked the statistics and research methods side of the degree program and did primary research during graduate school and then initially in organizations. People saw what we were doing with the survey results and the analysis. And so then they started bringing us other data sets that we didn't collect, that we had no control over, and asking us to do cool things with those data sets, which is more or less what at the time was called data mining. It's morphed into various names, but it's now really the practice of data science. In my opinion, right, it's always been the application of the scientific method to data. And so that's what I do for a living. It just goes by different names.
And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, you asked kind of how I got into the field, right? So, I did an internship. The internship turned into a contract employee position and then eventually into a full-time position. And in my career then, I have functioned as an internal analytical consultant at various levels. So I started within one operating company. Then I did the same basic concept, built the team out for the region, for North America. And then I joined a global organization for the parent company and established a internal analytical consultancy for the entire enterprise, which was a lot of fun. And then I came back to Purina 2 years ago to get back to people in my time zone and wanted to be back face to face again post-COVID. So it's been nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember when you told me that you are a psychologist by trade, by fashion, I could relate a lot because I remember back in the academy, like military psychology was my favorite subject. And then I was always fascinated with that, just human nature in general. And I found it immensely useful in terms of navigating organizational change. So maybe that's a question before we even dive into your playbook. Like how do you find your education in psychology relevant and useful in your one? It's a big question, but
yes. That is a big question. I always say this to everyone that works for me. It does not matter what you do technically. If you can't communicate it to a fellow human and convince that human to change some process, then it's worthless. It's a complete waste of time and energy. And so the human component is always, it's the last mile, right? I mean, if you don't succeed at the communication and the process change, it does not matter whether you use a neural net or a regression or a correlation or just addition. It matters not whatsoever. So it's ultimately going to be a human problem. Everything is a human problem.
Absolutely. Even on the masterclass, we talked about the last mile problem in data science and analytics, but this is the real last mile of how to actually change beliefs and behaviors. And I know we say this all the time on the podcast, but the whole question of culture change, it's a buzzword, like create a data-driven culture, but what is culture? It's not a philosophical question. It's more like even etymologically, it is basically beliefs and behaviors in a certain group. If you look it up in the dictionary, that's what culture is. Okay, so how can you change it? And then that's the whole conversation of what drives behavior, and then beliefs themselves. So if beliefs drive behaviors, how can you change beliefs? How can you rewire those internal assumptions? And now suddenly we're in the field of psychology. So I'm sure a lot of those.
And just to add one comment, so sorry to interrupt you, Laszlo, but just to add a comment to that, I get excited about this topic. To me, the other important consideration is most of the people, and I'm exaggerating here to prove a point, but most people that work in analytics tend not to have authority over everyone, right? You tend not to be the CEOs of the companies. You don't make all the rules. You're not king for the day or queen for the day. And so as a result, you have to have influence skills. Like I always tell my people, it's more important to be a good influencing consultant than it is to be a technically proficient consultant. Both are important. But going back to this culture change, how do you get people to change anything when you have zero authority over them? You can't command them to change. You can simply influence them in such a way that gets them to ultimately decide to change, and that's the key.
That's such a good topic. We didn't plan on diving into that, but I think about it a lot. So this whole question of authority. So there's authority and influence. So you can have authority without influence. So think about, Ceausescu, the Romanian communist dictator who was shouting orders at the firing squad. He had a lot of authority, not much influence. Right?
Nope.
But you can absolutely have situational influence, and you can absolutely have what we call local star power. And that is all about how you frame situations and how you communicate. That happens through communication. So authority in and of itself, I mean, if you think about it, if authority did the job for you, then leadership would be the easiest thing in the world. Just tell people what to do and they do it.
Yeah.
It's the opposite. It's the most difficult thing. So this is fantastic. I'm sure that this will be an element of your playbook as well, because we're going to talk about the organizational change. So first of all, with your mandate, coming into the organization, I mean, how did this was it like a project that you had to implement like a hub and spoke model? What's the context around that?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And actually, in the spirit of full disclosure, the main change that was top down that to set up the hub and spoke model happened just before I came back to Purina. So I was not part of that initial initiative, but I'll speak to a couple key elements of it. There was an enterprise-wide committee. So they had people from every vertical, supply chain, sales, marketing, the whole 9 yards, all work together with an external company. So they happen to partner with Gartner Consulting, but that's irrelevant, to decide on setting up this hub and spoke model. And that was, that was really required to get the top-down buy-in to the process and to get them to communicate it out. So once that was communicated, then it's about resourcing. And so they merged some existing data analytics teams. They set up one of the senior VPs. They put that senior VP over what was called digital transformation at the time. And that person reported directly to the CEO. So they put this very high level within the organization. Another key component that happened as I was joining the group was they started to staff product owners from the business. So a lot of the technical work that was being done by technical proficient, experts, but they were each team was led by a product owner that came out of sales or marketing or technical production or procurement, et cetera, et cetera. And so they understood the business at a very deep level. And then as the product owner, your main role is to interact with those business stakeholders and to do that influence, right? Influence that authority. And so when you came out of that group, you already have the established relationships, you already have the connections, you already have the trust. And so it was a very seamless engagement when you had those product owners from the business. I can't stress that as that's a very important consideration in setting this process out. As far as management styles are concerned, we can go to length on, going from project management to product management. That's a whole nother topic. Going from waterfall to agile, of course, everybody and their little brothers doing that these days. The other important component is we're we are still in process. So we're not complete in this. And we are setting up a matrix organization. So everyone belongs to, in this hub organization, everyone belongs to both a team and a guild. In our case, we have some branding here. We're branded the Hive, like a beehive. And so we call each of our teams swarms. So everybody's in a swarm and a guild. But the point here and what I'm trying to break is your swarm is set on delivering business value. And so they are arranged around each of the various business data elements. Generating demand is a whole group. There's several on the commercial side, retail activation, commercial strategy, things like that. But then your guild is around your technical proficiency. So we'll have a data engineering guild, a data science guild, a data architectural guild. And the guild's job is to develop staff the organization. So anytime we're hiring, they will be in charge of the onboarding process, making sure that the guild is continuing to be a learning organization. And so that's kind of the matrix within the Hive, within the hub organization. Loosely speaking, the teams they're kind of two versions of the teams. So we have our customer-facing swarms. Those are ones that where you absolutely need a product owner that just comes from the business, like I spoke to earlier, because their main interaction is with each of the business entities, like sales, marketing, and supply chain. We also have then enablement and literacy swarms or teams. The enablement and literacy is a slightly different, target group. So some of them are across the full enterprise, like my own. So our AI ML swarm, artificial intelligence, machine learning swarm, our mandate is across the entire organization. So we'll work with any of the verticals, any of the business entities. Other enablement and literacy swarms are focused internally on each of the other Hive groups. Like we have a platforms group that is their job is all about the platforms, right? Keeping things running as it should. We have a data governance swarm that's all about making sure the governance is okay. We have a digital enablement swarm focused on trying to raise people's talent in the digital space within each of the spokes. So that's kind of how it's managed. From a issue standpoint, do you want me to keep going, by the way?
Yeah, absolutely. So I already wrote a page of notes that I will ruthlessly dissect. So don't worry about that.
Okay.
Absolutely. So in fact, I just did a podcast with Kate from Miro. You remember Kate from the masterclass?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was on instilling a culture of experimentation.
Yeah.
And we also talked about, because I actually started using Miro without her encouraging me in any way. Miro is so useful for visual alignment, and we'll definitely, I'm taking notes, but we'll definitely put your organizational model, if you don't have it already, into a Miro board to visualize the organizational structure. But absolutely, we're going to go into detail on all of those. I always like to pull it back, big picture, and then dive in. So, and I will ask definitely questions around even the project management, product management, not too much, but just to give context. But talking about context, so before we properly visualize how this actually looks like, because I find it fascinating, what was driving this whole change in the organization? Big picture. What do you think of, maybe talking about psychology on that front? What was the pain and the opportunity that really drove this entire initiative?
Well, it's interesting. I actually think that part of the lack of analytical maturity at Purina over the last, I'm talking a long time, decade and a half, has been the result of success. Purina has been a massively successful company, primarily through distribution and through good branding. Technically, we make very good product itself. So, the quality of our product is phenomenal. And our price is decent, right? So, we're competitive. As a result, we can't make it fast enough. Consumers want it. You fast forward into COVID and all of the supply chain disruptions and things that happened. You also talk about isolation, right? Everybody was isolated. You couldn't go out. Well, a lot of people found that as a great opportunity to train a new puppy. And so the amount of surge of additional to people who were interested in pet food really skyrocketed. So we actually had some boom years during COVID, which is an interesting problem to have, right? Because you have on one end supply chain problems, and on the other hand, a massively increasing demand. So it was obviously a challenging time. I think those challenges brought to the surface all of the places where we were immature, inadequate in our analytics journey. You would be amazed and shocked by how much of and this is true in other places too, but how much of the company is run by Excel spreadsheets. And it's okay when you're not in stress. Once you're in stress, right, it puts pressure on the cracks, and you start to see where things break down. And as a result, and then layer on top of all of that, the rise in all of the popularity of the topic, right? I mean, you can't turn on the news and not see something about ChatGPT and all the different, there's always something in the AI ML space that is hot. And so the executives started to see this convergence of topics are really important, and we're stressed and we're seeing all these cracks, and we're not maturing as fast as we need to. And so that became the big impetus to develop a better strategy. And so that's when the partnership happened with Gartner, and they started thinking about a different operating model. And that's when they came up with the hub and spoke.
Okay, now that's great, because actually this is a topic that we touch on quite often now, is that a lot of analytics work is about creating conditions and laying foundations and waiting for the event, because the event will come. Some sort of event will happen. I mean, no one can foresee something like COVID, but it can happen in the organization. CEO leaves, a new data-obsessed CEO comes on board. Maybe the opposite happens, something really accentuates pain that's already there. So let's say that lack of analytical maturity, which is, again, despite of all the buzz and the trends blowing in your direction, there's always a gap of adoption. There's always that gap between the business and analytics, and situationally, suddenly that can be a lot of light that just illuminates that and makes it more painful, which you can then use to galvanize change and drive it. So, okay, this is great. That's very useful. So one layer on top of that, because you mentioned, so, and we do talk about agile quite a lot these days. So maybe we can just spend a few minutes there. So project management, product management, agile, what was kind of the workflow structure and context of this whole change? Maybe it's just useful for people to hear and know, and they can benchmark their own systems against that.
Sure. Well, I guess I can answer that in two ways. One, the global analytical consultancy that I set up in my previous role, we strived to be agile in language, but the funding model prevented us from truly being agile, because at the end of the day, we had to sell our services. So it was a pay for performance kind of a model. So if we wanted to partner with a given entity in France, for example, we had to sell our services to that entity, and they had to agree to pay a certain amount. Well, if you need to estimate how much the amount is, you need to estimate the work. And in estimating the work, you're really setting up a waterfall kind of a scenario. You can set up contingencies for being as agile as possible, but you still need to size the entire effort. So, Trent said, if I can compare that to the system we have in place here in my current role, we work in 2-week sprints, and we try to show something of value to our stakeholders every 2 weeks. And that in and of itself is challenging in some entities, right? I mean, in some projects. But the point is that you can, the funding model is completely different. We are entirely funded by the organization. So the hub is not a pay for service. So that begs the question of priorities, which we'll get to here in a second. But going back to the question on agile, we can be truly agile. So after 2 weeks, if we have developed something and we show it to a stakeholder, and the stakeholder says, yeah, I asked for that 2 weeks ago, but now that I see it, it is not at all what I want. Can we completely shift gears and do something that is entirely different? We have the complete freedom to say absolutely, because it's all about business value. However we can get to that business value the quickest, we will do so.
Okay, fantastic.
Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. And also, I'm not trying to like re-engineer your playbook either. I'm just
Yeah.
always like to go from the big picture, because even in this case, yeah, I mean, wait for something, wait for some sort of event, internal, external. Use that wind to propel you forward. Okay, find some sort of a project management workflow that will allow you to respond quick to changes, because that's the whole thing. I mean, the things will change. So that's super useful. And even the tactical layer of 2-week sprints. Some people are just looking for confirmation of that. Of, okay, we do something like that. This is why we should keep doing it. Or maybe we should pivot a little bit. So that's fantastic. And then you started to talk about this whole Hive a swarm model, which is fascinating. First of all, is this something that you guys developed in-house, or is this something that exists somewhere else as well? I know that there are different organizations, the squad model, a lot of these are just, different labelings, but like how much of this is something that you can find elsewhere, and how much of it is like Nestle, Purina, trademark in-house?
I would say most of the organizational design is entirely out there. I mean, you can Google hub and spoke model and read about it, and you'll find lots of examples that will be exactly the same as ours. We just have branded it differently. So there's nothing necessarily proprietary about the organizational design itself. It's much more just the branding. So we call the hub the Hive. We call the teams within the Hive the swarms. That's the branding of it. And so, everything on our slides is a 6-shaped, like a honeycomb, like in the different shapes.
Yeah.
So, that sort of thing. And it's kind of hokey, but it sticks, right? It sticks in people's minds. And so it works.
Yeah. That's what you want, for it to stick, no pun intended with the honey. I don't know if that's, it wasn't like intentional that, something close to a pet would be kind of like bees, or it just happened to be. All right. So can you just explain then? So you have, because if we just slow it down a little bit, so we have the Hive. Is that so? That's the big, that's the big hub structure, and then underneath we have the guild. You said so.
Yeah, there's swarms and guilds.
Well, okay, and then the guilds are the bigger ones, or
the swarms are focused on providing business value to the different business entities. The guilds are focused on internal capabilities. So the guilds are designed around roles. So there's a data engineering guild, there's a data science guild, a data architecture guild. And as I said before, the guild's focus is really it's mainly on development. It's mainly on people. The swarms are mainly on the P&L. It's on business value.
Okay, so there's a different dynamic.
Yes.
One is more like an internal operational efficiency maintenance type of posture,
yes.
And then the swarm is on the offense, right?
Absolutely. So I'll give you an example, right? As we're growing, we have the need to develop some kind of standardization across a given role, like code standards, code reviews. So there's a data engineering guild. They developed a flow for how they want to do their code reviews within their guild. We got wind of it as the data science guild. Right? I'm the leader of the data science guild. We had almost the exact same flow that we had developed with a couple of differences. So we just sat together and said, okay, can this be one code review that we can do for all of the Hive, or does it really need to be broken up by the different guilds? And at the end of the day, we felt like the stuff they had that we didn't have was beneficial to us. The stuff we had that they didn't have was beneficial to them. And so we were able to really form one code review process that it's not a mandate. It's kind of here's a great way to do the best code review you can. If you want to use it, go for it. But you should do code reviews. And we start, allowing time for code reviews. So that's just one example of what the guild brings to the table. Now that brings time and attention away from the business, right? Because we're also required to develop results that bring business value. And so that's where it's that give and take between the product owner who wants to develop real business results and the guild leader who's trying to develop the people and the processes. And so that's a good conflict, right? It's a healthy conflict.
Yeah, exactly. Healthy tension between the two.
Yeah, there you go. That's a better word. Healthy tension.
No, that's fantastic. And all also, so I see that you have the customer facing swarm, then you have the was it architecture and literacy? I kind of have
Enablement and literacy.
enablement. I have a doctor's handwriting,
Yes.
So I keep sticking to pen and paper because I just find it magical, but
Yes.
sometimes it's hard to make out what I wrote down. In the data governance swarm and digital enablement swarm. So are those the 4 swarms in the?
There's platforms. Well, these keep morphing, right? So I think what I wrote down here isn't even valid now. I mean, because we're changing with the business as needed. So we're collapsing some of them together. But there's basically platforms, which is about the systems in place, making sure that everything is up and running. There is digital enablement. It's enablement of some basic BI skills for the business. It's a lot about we're a big Microsoft house, so it's a lot about Power Automate and things like that. We have data governance, which is a fairly new entity that we've brought on house. It was always part of the plan, but you have to mature enough to get to there. And then the AI ML is the 4th. So yes, you're correct. There's 4.
How do you guys make the decisions on when to create a new one, when to collapse one? What is the process?
That's an excellent question that I'm not sure I have a good answer for. Because
that's what an excellent question is.
Yeah, I don't know that we've done it enough to understand or to anticipate when to properly do it. We're still learning in that way. Well, when it came to things like the data catalog and data governance and some of the enablement topics, they were similar enough to form a collective, and we lack the resources to truly staff each of them as a separate entity yet. And so instead of setting them up each as separate swarms with only like 1 person or 2 people, we decided to just make them a collective for the time being and see if that works. So I think the answer is really more in just out of necessity and resources than it is out of true strategy, right? I think we'll get there. I mean, once we grow and mature enough, I think we'll start making more strategic decisions in that space. But I think right now it's just out of necessity. Do we have proper leadership over each of them?
I think that's actually a great takeaway there. That instead of trying to maybe make these decisions proactively, in this case, it's very useful to like adapt to the circumstances and let kind of the market decide. It's like on when you do that. Okay. That is super cool. So, okay, now I think we kind of reached a point where you left off before. So, okay, I can kind of see now, the big picture and then some of the project management workflows around this and the structure and the cadence. So, as we continue, where would you like to continue in this framework?
Well, I can tell you some of the issues that the hub and spoke model really came up against first. Where were the big problems? Number one was that we had a really big culture of outsourcing. We still do. And I think that goes back to what I said earlier. Purina as a company has been very successful for a very long period of time. And so there are certain entities, particularly on the commercial side, where they haven't been strapped for resources. And so when it came to important questions, it was easier a lot of times to buy the answers to those questions than it was to develop them internally. And so there's this historical culture of outsourcing that has been difficult to come up against. So when the hub organization was established, the whole idea of a hub and spoke is that you develop technical proficiency within the hub. And that is a lot of times in direct competition to some of the outsourced third parties that had previously been providing the same service. And so you have to go through that conversation on it's augmentation, it's not competition, right? We're not replacing anybody at this point. We're simply creating an alternative. When I think of things like intellectual property, yes, you can partner with vendors and you can own the intellectual property. But most often, they will sell something similar within a couple of years to your competitors. I mean, that's just the name of the game. I hope I'm not offending anybody in saying that, but it's like that. That's how the game works. And when you develop it in-house, you have complete 100% control over the intellectual property. And so there's a reason to have some form of internal capabilities. And it's just a trade-off. There's a benefit to having those external partnerships because it enables you to scale up and scale down as needed when certain priorities become more or less important, without having to hire and fire people, right? That's not a fun game to play. You don't want to hire a bunch of people and then have to let them go. Period is great at not doing that. We have avoided that for lots and lots of years, which is a wonderful thing. And so you need that third-party connection to be able to scale. But you also need some percentage of your effort in the data analytics space being in-house. And when I first joined PeerNet, I thought the pendulum was way too far to the outsourcing side of things. And the hub and spoke model really flew in the face of that and caused some tension, some sparks initially. There were some people on the leadership team that felt like the role of the hub was not to actually do data and analytics. It was simply just to manage vendors who did data and analytics. And that very quickly was dispelled pretty early. But it did cause some conflict initially.
How did you navigate that conflict? So that's actually one of those things where, even when you said that, the classic, this is not replacement, but augmentation type of narrative. So that conflict, do you have any advice of best practice on how to approach this whole conversation?
Well, it was certainly that augmentation line of reasoning. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think secondly, you can make the case on the intellectual property front. And so I did find several external articles written about organizations that had developed things in-house and it led to patents or copyrights or other legal protection of things. It's hard to find that in the AI/ML space. There's less about that. I mean, it's a newer topic, but I found a few of those as well and brought those to leadership and said, as we move away from BI, not that we're leaving BI, but as we take less focus on BI and more focus on AI/ML, you need to have internal capabilities. And a couple of valid reasons are certainly IP and then that augmentation line of reasoning. So I think those are really the two biggest that we use. Actually, the third one was just proving it by doing it. And actually this brings up another point I wanted to make later. You're always going to have some percentage of stakeholders that think you're the best thing ever, some percentage of stakeholders that think you're practically the devil. And then there's the big majority of the middle, right? I mean, it's kind of, there's 10% on one side, 10% on the other, and then there's the other 80. Now, I always tell people to focus on some people who think you're great first. And it's not, and I don't mean that in like an arrogant way. I mean that in they're willing to partner, they're willing to provide their time and their energy towards proving out something. So one of the ways we sold this model to some of the people that were a little bit more skeptical was to partner with some of those early adopters, develop something that led to something we could point to on the profit and loss statement. And then we championed that to the organization. And that became just part of the influence, right? Look what we were able to do in-house with, non-third-party resources in a fraction of the time, in a massive fraction of the cost. And that was a huge, huge selling point.
Got it. So basically that kind of argumentation that you have, I mean, the argument itself is just one element, but ultimately what you want to do is create this kind of overwhelming momentum where, yes, you support your actions with arguments and you support your arguments with actions. So kind of like that type of combination. Were there any like usual suspect common objections that were thrown your way? If maybe you can recall some.
To internal resources versus outsourcing, or just general hub and spoke?
Well, I guess both. In this case, I was referring to specifically the outsourcing and or internal capabilities, but maybe we can also expand the scope to, like, in general, you making your case for the hub and spoke.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this sounds kind of crazy, but the biggest objection to doing things internally is just that there's that mantra of that's not how we do it. We've been doing it this way for lots of years, and so there was there's that culture of just repeating things every year because that's the way the previous person did that role, and there's a lot of that goes on in organizations. So I think that's a poor answer, but that's the truth, in our organization. As far as like objections to the hub and spoke model, I think the largest one I get is when another mini organization somewhere out in the business tries to set themselves up as almost a separate hub. And so instead of behaving like a spoke, they set themselves up as another hub, trying to organize several smaller entities within that business function.
A rogue swarm, I guess.
Yes. And so as a result, then there's some back and forth on roles and responsibilities. To me, the biggest danger here is that you want your analytic talent in the hub to be very deep on technical expertise and fairly light on business domain knowledge because of the fact that we have to work across the entire enterprise. The benefit of a spoke analytical team is that they can develop deep expertise on that business domain at the expense of sometimes being able to focus as exclusively on the latest and greatest technical, proficiency, right? And that's what they rely on with the hub. And so when you're setting up these mini hubs, then sometimes you get this focus on, they're too focused on the technical when, something simple could just solve the problem. They're too focused on just trying to own the politics around who gets to share the glory and the success, which things like that just always kill me. So I don't know. That's a tough nut to crack when you get to those teams because if they have support from their senior executive, then you just have to play the slow game of influence over time with the other spokes, as opposed to trying to focus directly on implementing change within that spoke. And we're still in that process today. So there are a couple of teams that are kind of rogue, if you will. And I think over time they will be shown to be more of a hindrance as opposed to a benefit. But the jury's still out. I don't know if that's going to play out or not.
Yeah, you're creating the conditions for change.
Yes.
Around it. And you mentioned that sometimes it's literally just the status quo. That's the main argument, that this is how we've been doing it. And then again, something that we found, if you want an easy solution for that, or like a simple solution, not easy, is again, identify a trend, focus on shining a light on the opportunity and accentuate whatever pain is present. Like that's the kind of double combination that will help you to get things moving. At least get the frame out of that status quo mode, and then you'll need to fill out that void with something that will be compelling as an alternative.
Yeah.
All right. So this culture of outsourcing and internal capabilities, we kind of covered that. And what next?
Yeah, the last thing I was going to try to cover here on was key strategies, and I think I've hit on some of them already, but I'll reiterate. To me, there were three main strategies that have led to success that have been part of this. And by the way, this is not entirely me either. I joined a great team, so I hope I'm not talking as if this is all myself. I've learned a ton from working with great people, but one is selecting your partnerships. I already mentioned that you have some spokes who are excited to work with you and some who are less excited to work with you. You really need to find ones that are willing to partner on something that has great business potential, but also is willing to champion the outcome. So you want somebody who is an advocate, who will talk loudly about the partnership, particularly when you're trying to build this new organization. To me, it always comes back to connection to the profit and loss statement. So can you speak to the analytical exercise in such a way that drives some number that executives care about? If you can get back to revenue, margins, the things that people care about, market share, that's ultimately going to help your cause. So number one is work with great partners. Number two, it gets back to this, the connection with the P&L. We talked about how the funding model in my old organization was a pay-per-play funding model. So we had to get funding in order to partnership. In this case, we are fully funded. And so because we're fully funded, that everyone thinks my time is quote unquote free to them. And so everybody has something that they want me to do for them. So how do you prioritize? Prioritization is always the big issue. And so we have been trying desperately to get people to put business value to their use case ideas. And that's easier said than done, because a lot of the use cases that they have good ideas for, we don't necessarily know how it's going to pan out until we get into it. And there's also this idea that if I put a number to something, someone in finance is going to hold me to it. At the end of the year, they're going to say, why didn't you deliver that number? You promised that number, and I don't see it. And so there's this kind of fear that if I put a number to it, I'm going to be held accountable. And so we have to move away from, this is not a finance exercise. It's not an ultimate P&L exercise, right? I mean, we aren't connected to the P&L yet. We're just simply brainstorming a new analytical use case. And we are trying to come up with ways that use case will bring value if we're successful. And so you have to get them to feel comfortable talking in that hypothetical space. And there are several of the spokes that almost flat out refuse. Number one, because they fear the finance, hey, we're coming later. But number two, they almost have no idea of how to come up with that number. So how do you put a numeric figure to something that is theoretical? I can talk about different ways we do that. I mean, if it's time saved, we'll work on something that saves a ton of time. You can come up with a flat rate for, kind of a generic ballpark salary that you can apply to a given department. And if we're saving, 3 people's time for 3 weeks out of every month, you can quantify that and come up with a number. If we're driving, margin, we can come up with, well, what does a 1% margin increase mean to the company? Are we able to get to that 1% margin increase across the whole enterprise? You can start to make estimates. And I always tell people, as long as you are transparent with your assumptions, they can poke holes in your assumptions all they want to. My point is that we just need to come up with a ballpark directional estimate. It may be a little too high, a little too low, but at least it's somewhere in the ballpark. That way, when I have a ballpark project over here for this entity, and we could make 10 million, and I have this other one over here, and the ballpark is 2 million, well, then it's clear. Even if they're both off by $1 million or $2 million, I should go work over here on the 10 million one, not this 2 million one. Not yet anyway, right? Let's solve the 10 million one, get the 10 million value, and then go to the 2 million. And so that's where it comes into pushing her stakeholders hard on developing that business value business case around each of the use cases in the data analytics space. And that's challenging. That's very challenging.
Yeah, I love it because it's ultimately like a storytelling exercise, right? That's what it is. I mean, what you're asking is like, look, I need a narrative around this. And the narrative needs to be in the context of the business.
Yeah.
Like, that's actually what you're asking. So ultimately, it's so funny that as the data analytics team, you almost have to train your stakeholders on how to tell business stories. That's what it is. And I love it because just referring back to that conversation that I had with Kate, it's kind of fresh in mind because I think we did it yesterday. And she was talking about how to create a culture of experimentation. And an element of this is always like not to have theories, but have hypotheses, in plural. And hypothesis is exactly the kind of thing that would log down on one particular testable dimension that you can attach some sort of business outcome to, that it becomes something that you can test. If it's just a theory out there, it still has value, but that value needs to be brought to life. In this case, with the story, proper context. So actually, I don't know if it's like too much of a tactical question, but do you have like a process of, okay, someone comes to you and they say, hey, we would love to do this. And you kind of know that there is something there because you've seen multiple use cases like that, but then you need to push them to, hey, let's develop that story around it. Do you have a framework for it?
Yes. I always start with me first understanding their business world. What is the context around the pain point? We then move into what we potentially could do to solve that challenge. And I don't get into the data or analytics side of things, just in a business context, what is it that you lack, that you need? And then I say, okay, if we magically can provide that to you, the third question then becomes this one. It's who benefits from that insight? What is that end user's job? What do they do for a living? How does that pain point affect them? And how would this solution change what they do? What is the business process change around it? And how does the value then come into play? Where is the value? What does the value look like? What would it look like if we solve this problem? Is it time saved? Is it margin? Is it volume? Is it sales? Is it, we go through it. I ask them I keep asking them a million questions until we really secure what that value statement really is before we go back to the data question. My big thing, Laszlo, is I always have data and analytics people in the room in addition to the business people. And the data people love to just go right into the data. Well, what data do you have and how much history? And it's irrelevant, right? If you don't have the business question nailed and the potential value, then you may end up working on something that has almost no value or something that isn't even a challenge for the end user. Because a lot of times the end user is not in the room. It's somebody over them that is presenting the idea in the first place. So yeah, avoiding the data questions and the data conversations until you
as long as you can. As long as you can avoid the data question. Okay.
Absolutely. Which is why I always think that everybody should learn consultancy skills. I know at some point we'll get maybe into some advice on other professionals, but consultancy skills is a big one for me. At the end of the day, you have to know how to interact with people, unless you have the luxury of having a large enough team to where you can have some back-end experts that just solve really tough challenges and very few people interact with them, right? And that's a luxury I've rarely had.
It's good to kind of orient yourself towards that because it generates a ton of value when you have that. It's just, again, as you said, it's often a luxury.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, it does remain to be a pipe dream. So it's, often it's just better to come down to earth, to reality, and kind of earn your way there. And whenever it comes, then it's a plus.
So there, maybe can I go back to the key strategies? Because I still have one more.
Absolutely.
So I had three.
Absolutely.
The first one was work with great partners. The good people. The second one was the connection to real business value, and the third one is transparency. We have a process that we call orchestration, and it's how new ideas come into the pipeline. So we have a SharePoint. It's an app. Basically, you can open the app and you can include any new idea you have for a use case. And everyone across the enterprise can see the library. So anybody can pull these up and see the notes you've created and anything you want to do. And the benefit here is because you can, because supply chain can open the app and look at what sales is doing in the analytics space, they may see something that and go, oh, that's great. I think that would apply to my area of business too. Let me be involved. Let me see what you've done. Let's share ideas. Or maybe there's a build on top of it. Maybe, oh, I like this, but if you did this, it would be even more helpful for me. And so there's a lot of cross collaboration that happens because of the transparency. The second thing is that you always get the prioritization question. Why are you prioritizing them over me? And when it's fully transparent, it's all there. So any value statements that people estimate on value, we put in the orchestration app. So I can see this use case estimates a $10 million return within a year, whereas yours is only $1 million. So maybe that's why we're focusing not on you yet, So it's been very helpful to have that transparency. So that's my third, key strategy.
That's great. Again, Kate mentioned that experimentation backlog, and this is very similar. She said that it's a great platform for collaboration, both to kind of bring participants and contributors to the forefront who otherwise might be in the background because that's just their style, but they are comfortable, let's say, throwing things in the backlog. But again, that's a great platform for people to collaborate. Good question. How do you get people to actually engage and use that app, that orchestration app? Like what went into the design of that and then the implementation and getting them to actually adopt it on a day-to-day basis?
Well, ultimately, if they would like to utilize the resources in the Hub organization, it has to go through that process. because it's part of the governance structure. So one of the first things that we do before we actually start on a new use case is after it's been prioritized by the business, this is what we want to do. We'll then set up a discovery session. And I have, my colleagues who run the orchestration process, they will set this, discovery session up. We'll bring in all the players that we think have some say in what the business challenge is. And we'll go back to those three questions I just got to. It's, what's the business challenge? How might we solve that challenge? And how is the end user going to derive value from it? And that's really the point of that first discussion, is to generate the context around that business case. And so that's sort of part of the orchestration process. After a use case comes out of orchestration, it's kind of the language we use, then it's been scoped, it's been understood, we understand the value, we understand what we're going to attempt to do from any of the data analytics space. Sometimes it's build a new data asset, sometimes it's, apply a machine learning model, but we understand what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And then it's about setting up the 2-week sprint cycles and start that agile development.
So basically you trim it so that it has the right shape and form, and now that it's plug and play, and your system is designed to churn value out of it as soon as possible with the sprint.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, that's awesome. Do you have anything else here, by the way, because I wanted to ask you, you already mentioned some of the consulting skills that we can, I think, maybe spend a few minutes on before we come up against the hour. I knew that this will also just ran by fast. But anything else that you would want to mention here with the key strategies, partnerships? I actually have some questions around that too. Transparency, orchestration.
Yeah, I'm looking back through my notes. I think I really covered everything. I think the only one that we didn't hit on as important is really the branding. I mean, I know we spoke to it, but a lot of times people I'm going to exaggerate to prove a point here, in the data analytics space, they're not seen as being creative. And so actively branding yourself in a creative way will open people up to discussions with people who are seen as the data geeks, and so like the Hive, I kind of make fun of the Hive and the swarms. It's kind of hokey, but it breaks down that exterior wall of an impression of the eggheads, and as they can come to us and we're just people trying to have some fun. And so I think that is an understated point in any sort of data and analytics enterprise. Instead of coming up with the latest buzzword for your team, maybe you should brand it in such a way that adds a little fun to the mix. I've found that to be very successful.
That's a great point, because like with these things, first of all, you always want to break preconceptions and these archetypes in people's minds, because especially if you want a higher profile, it's good to introduce variety into how they see you, just because you become more interesting. They can't really figure you out. Once people think that I can completely figure this out, like the Krog brain just says that, okay, we're safe, we're good. Let me deal with things that are more dangerous, more interesting, right? So the data analytics saves 100%. I agree that that's a great way to go. But when you do it, you can actually be quite liberal with how much you do that, because once you break out of that mold, now you have a lot more freedom on how do you express the personality of data analytics in the business. So 100%. That's like with the swarms and all. Do you guys have anything else that you do in order to kind of rebrand? Any other maybe best practices?
Other than just a lot of fun with the generative AI image, we'll generate images of bees doing all sorts of various things and include those on our slides or in our meetings, right? Just to lighten the mood and get a laugh. So yeah, but otherwise that's it.
It's focus on having fun in that sense.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And with the partnerships, so you said that you should choose someone who would be able to speak loudly about the fruits of your collaboration. So how do you identify those people?
Well, are they already well respected in the organization? There's a time and a place to find somebody who is less than well respected, because sometimes you can partner in such a way that turns them into a future hero, and a lot of times that's fun to see happen. There are other times where, like when you're getting your feet wet, you're trying to get the ship off the ground, you should probably partner with somebody who already has some respect in the organization. And so by championing things loudly, I'm more meaning that they have to, it's almost like they don't have to yell, right? It's when they speak, people do tend to listen already. So they have to have some level of connection and informal power in the organization. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. So you're looking for those influence signals.
Yes.
Basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And kind of connected to that. So you mentioned the consulting skills. So that would be an immensely useful thing for data analytics leaders to learn. First, and a lot of you guys do have that background. But then let's say someone who does not have that background, who just do not have the opportunity to spend a few years consulting. Can you just speak a little bit more about those skills? Like, what are those skills and how do you develop them?
The easier question is, what are they? The harder one is developing. I would say it's listening skills. Can you listen to business people talk to their pain points? Can you pick up the key elements that you hear and then come back to them? So facilitation skills. Can you facilitate that conversation? That includes picking out the key elements and coming back to them. Translation skills. Can you go from business to technical and technical back to business on a regular basis and seamlessly? And can you do so in such a way that brings people, if they want to be brought along in that journey of understanding? Correspondence skills. I can't tell you how many people I meet that, just sending a summary of a meeting, coming to terms with what was agreed to, follow up on emails. Those skills are lacking in a lot of people that are coming out of graduate school these days. And it's simple business acumen, right? Understanding, building trust, building rapport. I know it's kind of hokey, but the importance of small talk. I once had one of my supervisors said this to me because I kicked off a meeting and just went right to the heart of the issue at hand. And he pulled me aside afterwards and he said, the first minute or two is when they decide if they like you or not. And if you miss it, you can't get it back. And so he said, next time, ask about, even if you're asking about the weather, which is, the stereotypical small talk thing to do at the beginning of the meeting, it's if they don't like you, they don't want to partner with you. And so how do you develop that rapport and build trust? And there's a small talk component to it. And I meet a lot of analytically brilliant people who have almost no tolerance for small talk. They just don't, they want to get right to the heart of the issue. And I respect that. And I kind of came from that. And I've learned over the years the importance of pulling yourself back and reminding yourself that we have to have a connection first, a human to human connection.
I agree. Actually, even from the military, I had the same.
Yeah.
It's like you get right to the heart of the matter, what needs to be done, like very mission focused. And again, I respect that, but this is exactly what I found is that, small talk is underrated. And sometimes, a distaste for small talk almost becomes like a perceived virtue for someone, even though it is just something that can be immensely useful. I mean, it is that kind of transition phase where you can transition from one mode of operation into another, where we're now having this conversation. So it's actually useful. I think it just needs to be reframed of how you look at small talk. It shouldn't be this derogative thing. It's actually a great way to warm ourselves up for whatever we're going to work on now.
Yes.
So I agree with you 100%.
Absolutely. A couple more things. Persistence. Part of consulting skills is following up with people. We have that Midwest culture in the United States where people want to be very nice all the time. And I keep telling people that work for me, if you are bugging someone so much that they get a little irritated with you, but then eventually we get to business results, they're going to forget those little irritations that you bug them too much because they're going to be so excited about the business results. On the flip side, if you don't bug them and things drag on and they lose focus and lose interest and all of a sudden they've gone somewhere else for getting business value, they're going to think very poorly of you as a consultant. And so I keep telling people persistence is way more important than wanting them to necessarily always think you're the best person on the planet. So you have to kind of deal
at that moment in time.
Exactly.
Yeah, at that moment in time. Because again, the same thing as with small talk is it also becomes kind of like a perceived badge of honor. It's like, oh, I'm not the kind of pushy person.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times people are not pushy because they don't know how to be assertive in a way that can drive things forward, and it becomes intrinsically valuable when you can actually do that.
Yep.
And I know it's a fine line to walk, like everything, it's a muscle to train.
Yeah.
But people respect it and they love you for it when you can just push them enough.
Exactly. Last thing I'll say on consulting skills is the intense focus on making your stakeholders shine. Your job as a consultant is not to get the spotlight. Your job is to make the spotlight hit your stakeholder. And if you do that, you'll eventually get the leftover, spotlight, right? The spotlight will hit you eventually, but that should not be your focus. Your focus should always be on making your stakeholder get the accolades that they deserve. They are more connected to the business. They're going to be ultimately responsible for the business process change that has to happen with any data and analytics initiative. And so therefore, the main impetus should always be on them. In a recent example, we had a really big, successful project at the end of last year. We, once a year, do a big award ceremony with the things that most impacted the business. And they wanted to highlight this analytical exercise that we did in partnership with one of our business entities. And they wanted me to be a part of it. And I initially said, there's no way that I should not be the focus. The focus should be the business people. It was their idea. They're the ones who spent a lot of time and energy implementing change, responsible for it. We just did the math. And I'm not saying that it was not a big part of the project. They couldn't have done it without us, but it should be them that shine and receives the award. We get a supporting actor kind of award, not the main actor award. That's at least my opinion. But I think there's a healthy dose of that needs to be understood if you're going to be a good analytical consultant, internal or external. And
what I love is, as I just took these notes, is that all of this is about shifting the focus from yourself to the other person. So even the whole like how to be a facilitator, right? These listening skills, like a listening skill, it's all about how do I start listening to the other person. So I direct my attention to that other individual. Translation is about understanding, okay, what does this person understand? What is their world? What movie are they watching? What are their preconceptions? What is their vocabulary? Okay, what is it on that other side? And you're trying to align those two. Again, nothing about you. It's all about the other person, like very closely listening and paying attention. Correspondence, same idea, rapport, trust, and even small talk. Like, okay, but how do I make small talk, right? If you want to be actionable, well, just be interested in the other person.
Yeah, ask questions.
That's it. That's literally it. Be interested, curious about the other person, and just ask a few questions. Just normal, natural human questions. And then persistence, follow-up. Again, that's being very empathetic about, okay, I understand this person is busy. We work at this organization because we're good at what we do and we have competing priorities. Understand that this is a valuable project for him. He or she is under siege. And now I'm going to, in spite of that, apply the right amount of pressure to create additional value for this individual. And then again, making the stakeholder shine, that speaks for itself. So
I like how you put that. It's other focused. It's other person focused analytics. I like that. That's really good.
So look, this was fantastic, Kyle. I want to be respectful of your time because I know that we just went over the hour. Is there anything else that you would like to add? Maybe like a personal word of advice for aspiring leaders who would want to, really make something like this successful, or anything else that you might want to add?
Yeah, I mean, the only other 2 points I was going to make on, other professionals, in addition to the consulting skills, was understanding the profit and loss statement. If you've never taken a basic finance class, highly recommended. Somebody who comes up out of psychology, that wasn't part of my training. So I came into business not really understanding a P&L statement. So go understand that. And then be able to speak to how your work impacts something on the P&L. And then lastly, it was business acumen. There's a little bit of a different focus on if you're in a hub versus a spoke. If you're in a spoke, you should develop a lot of really deep business acumen. If you're in the hub organization, you kind of need a little bit across the whole enterprise. But you're always going to be a better consultant if you understand how your company operates. So when you change roles, right, you join a new company, if you don't understand the fundamentals on how your company makes money and provides value, and go back, how do they procure resources? What resources do they procure? What do they make with those resources? How do they sell those resources? What are the different business models? I mean, all those kind of questions. And again, that varies by entity that you're in. If you're in banking or manufacturing, those are very different worlds. But understanding that business acumen makes you a better consultant.
And on the business acumen side, so also what we found immensely useful is understanding the incentive structures.
Yes.
Like why people do what they do. Because we always talk about the 3 levels of storytelling. Technical storytelling, it's level 1. Most people can do it. It's not engaging. You can just talk about, let's say in data analytics, like how did you get the data? What algorithms have you used? What kind of platform the data lives in? No one really cares apart from data people. Now you can shift your focus to the business, which is great. Now you can talk into the P&L, the bottom line, revenue, churn, and all that stuff. That's great. The holy grail is where you can really connect this to individual motivations, because at the end of the day, you're always talking to people, individuals. The business itself is a collection of individuals working towards a shared goal, and everyone in a large enough organization will have to have different responsibilities and different incentive structures. And when you can figure that out, connect that to the larger business mission, now you can tell powerful stories.
Yes.
So I always say that it's not enough if you tell stories about data. In fact, you shouldn't. It's better if you tell stories about the business with the data.
Yeah.
That's better.
Yes.
But the best is if you tell business stories about people with data. It's like a side note. And for that, the incentive structures are your first base.
It reminds me of there are times when people will come to me and they'll pull me aside and they'll say, I hear other people are doing AI ML stuff. I would like to do it. I don't understand it. Where do I start? And my very next question to them is always, what number do you care about?
Yep.
And that really gets in what you're talking about, because it may not be the ultimate number that the organization cares about. It's the sales number that they care about that month or that quarter, right? Or it's the supply chain problem that they're trying to solve that week. It's what is top of mind right now? What keeps you up at night? There's all sorts of flavors of that question, but that always is where we start, because you got to connect it back to what they care about, which is your point. And I love that point. It's fantastic.
No, absolutely. Like finding the North Star, because usually in these organizations, you do have a North Star. If it's a well-managed organization, you have a North Star that's based on customer value.
Yeah.
And depending on what business you are, it can be different. It can be an NPS score if you're, for example, in the B2B, or it can be something based on customer value. And then everyone contributes to that North Star through some sort of number.
Yep.
And as you said, just what number do you care about? That's a great question. If that's the only thing that you take away from this conversation, let that be it. Like, what number do you care about? So,
yep.
Fantastic. Kyle, really appreciate you, sir. This was fantastic. And we loved working with you so far, and we look forward to continuing our collaboration.
Thank you, Lasso. It was a pleasure. A lot of fun.